Right. Thank you for waiting. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking time to join us for today. As the title for today's webinar goes, Rethinking Security for Modern Financial Services Ecosystems Built on Innovation. And this session today is done in conjunction with SFA and Palo Alto Networks. Now, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruben, the Chief Operating Officer of Singapore Fintech Association, and I'm joined by today with a panel of esteemed speakers who will share more with us, which I would be happy to introduce them to you in a while's time. Now, let me just start by saying, why are we doing this today? Fintech have not just only disrupted, but also benefited, make it much more easier for the way people and businesses interact with financial services. Securing bond in cloud financial data images at speed and scale is very important because Fintech, as the name suggests, built a lot of solutions on the cloud. Spirit of essence as you thrive on agile development, innovation, and time to market in order to gain the edge in a highly competitive market landscape. All these things are things that all my audience here today are very, very familiar with because it's exactly the environment that you are in. But as you are also a digital native born in the cloud, your exposure to vulnerability is also very, very high. And especially if you are going to be serving some of the financial institutions, this will definitely be at the top of your mind that will warrant a lot of attention. And a cybersecurity strategy that balances security with speed and agility is therefore key. Today's session will be looking at how fintech and new age financial services companies like yourself can secure your tech platforms that build on cloud. And more importantly, we also look at how can we simplify cloud security through a platform-based approach. So I just want to call out that this will be some of the key takeaways. And so if you do have any questions as well, please put in the Q&A. My panel of esteemed speakers will be happy to address them for you. Now, before we continue, just bear with me. You're going to just hear a bit more of my voice before I hand it over to the real experts in the house today. I do want to introduce my speakers to you, and I would love to do that. And it's really my honor for me to share their profile with you. First and foremost, I have Siddharth. Siddharth is the Field Chief Tech Officer that looks after the Japan and APAC area from Palo Alto Network. So Steve, in his role, is responsible for engaging CISOs or Chief Information Security Officers and the broader security community on emerging cybersecurity topics such as cybersecurity for cloud-native application security and securing the hybrid workforce. And at the same time, I also have Yen. Yen is the Field Chief Security Officer for APAC from Palo Alto as well. So in his role, Yen helps to develop innovative solutions, threat prevention strategies, and risk management frameworks for business executives as well as the wider cybersecurity community. He has more than 20 years of experience in this space, and he has led global security departments for Fortune 100 companies, deploying defense in-depth capabilities to thwart advanced attacks. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Miles. Miles is the head of security engineering from GXS. So Miles is currently the head of security, and he's responsible for DevSecOps, cloud security, and vulnerability management. And prior to joining GXS, Miles has led various teams in Amazon Web Services, AWS, including APAC Financial Services Security and APAC Security Architecture teams. And Miles has a background in investment in financial services security, previously working at both JPM as well as UBS, and both in Zurich and London. Now, so ladies and gentlemen, as you have seen today, that we have a team of not just only esteemed but very experienced speakers who are in this particular in this field today. So without further ado, let me just jump right in. Audience, you will realize that there's no slides. There'll be nothing of this. All you have is all these people's in-depth knowledge from their head, and they'll be imparting that to you right now. Now, before that, let me just start off with a question for Miles. So Miles, given your wide range of experience, both in AWS as well as in banks and FS, and now in GXS, I would really want to hear from you. How do you compare and contrast fintech's experience, your fintech and traditional experience when it comes to cybersecurity strategies?
Yeah, thanks, Ruben. And good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be presenting to you today. So I think if we compare fintechs and traditional financial services, one of the main differences I feel is if we take that question in two parts. First of all, the organizational structure and the culture within the organization. And then secondly, the approach to technology and cybersecurity, which I'll come back to in a moment. I think if we look at the organizational structure, typically in traditional financial services, often the cybersecurity team and the teams that are meant to be helping the engineering teams protect the product and the financial institution itself are very often disjoined from the actual engineering team doing the implementation. I think that's kind of number one. And I think that's an area where new fintechs at least have a chance to rethink how they do that, whether that's through programs like security champions, being kind of embedded in the engineering teams, or by actually having entire security engineering teams within the technology functions and line one control owners themselves. So that's the first one. I think from a culture perspective, fintechs have an opportunity to have a shift left approach to security, where they embed cybersecurity capabilities as far left in the developed life cycle as possible. Sorry, is my video still working? I'm not sure.
Your video is not, but look, it froze at a very nice view. So I'm literally staring at you, smiling at me.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Secondly, the culture, and then thirdly, I think fintechs, don't have a lot of historical technology debt. So typically, they get a chance to start, from a clean slate. They don't have lots of legacy systems that have been built in a non-automated way using CI/CD pipelines, and bringing all that together, the organizational structure, the culture, and the technology, I do feel fintechs have the ability to kind of get it right the first time around. That said, traditional financial institutions do have a lot of experience working with regulation and cybersecurity frameworks. They've typically got large investments in that area, and they understand what the regulator is expecting from a control framework and a security posture. So I do think there are pros and cons of both the fintech side and the traditional financial services side. But I would say across those three pillars: organizational structure, culture, and technology.
Right, thanks, Mal. I do have one leading question from that, since our audience are probably more in fintech space today. Oh, great, and you're moving. Right, so back to, so good to see you. Well then, okay. So I just want to move. I want to take one more question along to what you shared earlier, as our audience are really pretty much from fintech space. What if you have to just summarize one key advice that from your experience in FIs and big company, in big banks, what do you think you can give from a cybersecurity standpoint to these fintech players?
Yeah, I think the main point would be just get started somewhere. So I think if you're a very new fintech that probably has a small team, totally, not just a security team, but a very small engineering team and company as a whole, it might be quite daunting around where do you get started with your first security headcount or your first security tool or product. I think the advice from me there is to just get started somewhere. If you don't have the headcount for a dedicated full-time security employee, make it someone's voluntary job or 25% of one of the lead engineers' jobs to start on security. So once you've got the right personnel in place, the second thing would be, getting some tool, whether it's a commercial tool like Palo Alto or open source tool, getting those tools in place to provide you visibility into your security posture. Then once you at least know that, you can start being a bit more strategic around how you burn down your security issues and where your future investments should go based on the visibility that you're getting from your initial posture assessment, let's say.
Right, thanks, Miles. Now let me bring the camera to our other speakers as well. In the meantime, to our audience, if you have any other questions, please do feel free to put it in the Q&A so they can facilitate from there. I would like to turn attention to Yen. So Yen, in your experience being a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, and now working closely with your fellow CISOs on strategy topics, what are some of the quick wins FinTech can aim for to make early progress in their cloud strategies, and especially in the initial stages of this journey? So coming from companies who are 3-man team, 5-man team, who just start up, who may not have the full resources to get around, which is exactly to Miles' point earlier. Yen.
No, absolutely, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure. I want to kind of second Miles' point. And he brought up something I think that's absolutely crucial when you start your cybersecurity program in any fintech, in any company for that matter. And he mentioned culture. I read a long time ago, Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's like if you don't have culture, a lot of things are going to go wrong. And in particular, it's very poignant, in kind of this cloud culture, because so much of cloud is really reliant on the developer culture that's being built then. And oftentimes what we see is that if you don't focus on building that collaborative culture between cybersecurity and the development group, then you see this kind of segue, right? That dev culture is going this way, cybersecurity is trying to stop a highly innovative, highly fast-moving company, and that's bad news. So if I had to give one advice, I again, want to reiterate what Miles is saying around focus on your cybersecurity culture. Make it collaborative. Make it so that it's easy for developers to actually execute on your security requirements, your regulatory mandates, and give them the tools. Give them the right set of tools to do that. Especially if you look at a full life cycle, right? Give them the tools to be able to scan, for bad code. Give them the tools to be able to scan open libraries. Give them the tools to be able to look at issues during runtime. Give them the tools to be able to look at issues during configuration, and the list goes on and on. But I think the role of a security champion in a fintech is to really foster this culture of collaboration. I think, if I had to give one advice, that's the advice I'd give.
Thanks, Jen. Sid, before I go to Sid, let me bring back to Miles because I thought because you reiterate his point about culture. So Miles, I do want to bring this back to you since you started on that topic. From your experience, could you share with us one example that in the event that when we have this disparity between DevOps, cybersecurity, they don't see eye to eye, they don't work together, but of course, whoever makes money continues, so people see security as a form of defense. What do you, from your experience, to our audience here today, what do you think is one problem that would definitely surface and end up, what are the consequences behind those kind of scenarios, and really, is it worth the hassle?
Yeah, I think from my experience, what I've seen in the past definitely is when the cybersecurity team and the development or product team are not aligned. The development team typically wants to move fast and release new features and functionality to their users, and sometimes the cybersecurity team might not, have visibility into that roadmap or the business plans to launch at a specific date. And then when the cybersecurity team gets pulled in fairly late, it adds, a number of development cycles to remediate vulnerabilities that maybe the developers didn't even know were a problem at the start. So I think the shorter you can close that loop between the conversations between the cybersecurity team and the development or product team, better. And I think one of, going back to culture again, one of the ways to do that is, over communicate between the two teams. If they are actually separate teams in your organization, over communication is often better there. Ian also mentioned the role of a security champion, which typically is more within the product or engineering team that is very aware of the cybersecurity requirements that their organization has, so the standards and frameworks that they need to follow, and that they're embedding those practices on a daily basis into their own engineering teams. Right.
Thanks, Miles. There's a lot of insights there. I would love to have you to elaborate, but I guess if I can trouble you to just maybe have a quick fix at the bandwidth that you have at the moment, so that you will not be disrupted. But in the meantime, let me bring it to Sid then. Sid, this question is definitely for you. Fintech is actually born in the cloud, and I love the way it sounds, by the way. Fintech is born in the cloud. So many fintechs actually born in the cloud and enabling to build directly cloud-native microservices based on applications without the burden of app migration. But in this case, what does securing microservices app mean for an architecture perspective?
Thanks, Ruben. I think microservices is super interesting, right? Because what we're basically doing with microservices is, instead of the traditional monolithic application model where the application is just a black box and you don't really see what's going on inside, you're actually able to break up the application into smaller components that can scale independently of each other. And what that means from a business perspective is now you can roll out new features on your app without having to rewrite the entire code base, to put it very simply, right? So now your app is broken up into smaller components that can scale independently of each other, typically leveraging abstractions like containers or Kubernetes, which allow your workloads to be portable. Now, that of course brings in the whole element of API security, because the way that these microservices talk to each other is through APIs. So you need to have a good way to get a handle on the API traffic between these microservices components, and also with external components outside the application. So that's I think a new area of risk that needs to be tackled in a different way compared to traditional API security when you're talking about microservices applications. But there's also some security advantages, because now that you've broken up your application into smaller components, you're now able to profile the behavior of each of those components in a better way. So you're able to apply more granular behavior-based security inspections to say that, okay, this microservice typically behaves in this manner. It talks on these protocols, these ports, it talks to these external entities. But now we're seeing a change which is not necessarily malicious, but it's deviating from the normal baseline. And that's a super powerful thing, which was harder to do in the monolithic application scenario. So I think with microservices, there's definitely newer areas of risk which need to be addressed and can be addressed, but there's some advantages as well from a security perspective. And we saw with Log4j, we saw a lot of customers that were running containerized applications. They were able to leverage those security advantages. But you have to do security right. It's not these capabilities are not available out of the box. You need a platform for cloud security that can help you do all of this.
Thanks, Sid. I do have a follow-up question from there. So two questions. One is more from a noob perspective. I'm a noob, I'm not. So I do believe we have audiences who are probably business owners, who are probably fintech owners, who are good at development but not really strong in cybersecurity. And yet you are absolutely right. Microservices is really the way forward, because that's how they actually increase more traction with the users. But in this case, are we saying that there's also exposing ourselves to a high chance of a planned attack on different aspects at the same time, instead of just only go? So pardon me, this is just really from a noob talking. But also then on a more technical aspect, could you then elaborate with an example? So I'm sure in your experience you have many examples. So in this case, how can a good strategy really then support that security over that microservices apps?
Yeah, thanks, Ruben. So I think the first part of your question is there a higher chance of risk? Absolutely not. I think if you go back to the title of this webinar, it's about rethinking security for modern financial systems. So the fundamental thing is that when you're developing cloud native applications, you need to think about your security environment and your security strategy in a different way compared to when you were deploying a monolithic application on premises. If you try to apply those same security tools or the exact same security methods from a technology standpoint or even from a strategy standpoint, if you try and apply that in a highly scalable and automated cloud native application environment, it's not going to work. So you need to think about doing things differently. And that's what Gartner has been talking about with cloud native application protection platforms, or CNAPP, which is the idea that cloud native applications are built differently. And in order to secure them effectively, you have to bring together a whole bunch of previously unintegrated security capabilities like security posture management and workload protection and infrastructure as code scanning, and stitched all of that entire security and risk picture together so that the business can focus on the important things, which is what are my top risks and how do I address them. So what got us here won't get us there, and cloud native security is definitely very different from traditional on-premises security. The good news is that there are options available to help you along the journey, and we've been very fortunate at Palo Alto Networks to work with customers like Miles and a lot of other companies in the fintech space across the region and globally as well, as they're building cloud native applications. So if you do it right, you can actually end up being more secure, I think, in the cloud than you are on premises.
Ruben, if you don't mind, I want to add a couple of bits to that. I think one of the big misses that a lot of new startup fintech companies do is that they're really focused on one cloud service provider, and as you grow in your evolution, becoming more of a brand name and more of a viable company, and definitely getting more attention from the regulators, you're going to find that having a multi-cloud strategy is almost a necessity, right? And so, one huge advice I have is, as you start off, in your fintech journey, as you start off in your cloud security strategy, definitely have that multi-cloud view. And some of the practical effects of that would be that, if you've got a tool that you're just really only building and it can only work in a specific cloud service provider that cannot port over to another cloud service provider, that's debilitating to you, right? And so you need to make sure that when you have a multi-cloud mindset on the get-go, you start building tools that are actually portable across cloud service providers. You have a consistent, comprehensive view of your multi-cloud environment, and you have a consistent policy enforcement. You're not having point solutions for different cloud service provider that has different flavors of regulatory reports, different flavors of control, etc. That's very hard for you to keep a strong and cohesive security posture if you do that. So just wanted to add to that.
No, in fact, you bring in a very, very good point about multi-cloud, because this is definitely one thing that's top of many developers' mind right now, you see, because I would like to think that really nobody just only depends on one cloud. Even if I have on-prem, it will be a multiple prem, it will not just be only one. So in that case, I have Miles here, who is a practitioner. So Miles, can you just share with us? So we actually have a very good questions and the Q&A. I want to call it out, but before that, since I want to touch on the topic of multi-cloud. So Miles, can I just invite you to share your experience, especially with GXS right now, on how do you feel about multi-cloud? Is it a necessary evil? Okay, sorry, maybe not evil, but is it necessary? And also, how do you then work on the cybersecurity part, especially in the conversation? So let's tie that in. Also, we talk about culture with DevOps. So how do you sync all this up with multi-cloud on top of it?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Ruben and Ian. I agree with the points. I think the first thing to do when you think about multi-cloud is it's going to happen, but I wouldn't overthink it. So particularly at the start, when you're a young fintech, maybe with a small user base and a number of small products, focusing on a primary cloud provider, getting up and running, establishing yourself is probably the right thing to do. What I have seen in the past is organizations going multi-cloud for two reasons. First of all, from the criticality of the workloads that they are running, thinking about running more critical workloads across multiple cloud providers for resiliency. In some countries, it's a regulatory requirement from financial services to do that. And then secondly, I think there might just be a natural evolution to a different cloud provider for a different use case. So for example, I have seen fintechs running a lot of their compute intensive workloads out of one cloud provider, but they data analytics and machine learning capabilities out of another, depending on really what the workload calls for. I think how to approach that is twofold. First of all,
sorry, Miles. Apologies.
Technology and tools that you have, you need to have a very unified.
Sorry, Miles. We lost you for a good.
Am I back?
Second. Yes. No. Can I just maybe rewind you for the past 30 seconds?
Yeah. Can you hear me though? Apologies, guys. I don't know what's going on with my audio here today.
No worries. If maybe I can invite you to maybe just off the video for a start, so that it help to bend. Yeah. Sorry, Miles. Please go on.
Yeah. So you can hear my audio fine, right?
Very good. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I just to kind of recap, I think fintechs looking at multi-cloud should consider it from twofold. First of all, the need to do it from a regulatory and a resiliency perspective. At what point are their applications critical enough to want to evaluate the use of a second cloud provider, whether it's for cold disaster recovery or active resiliency across the application. And then my second kind of point was around the use of a second cloud provider for a different workload or a different use case, whether that's data analytics or machine learning, in contrast to your primary provider for, let's say, compute and business applications. From a security perspective, what you need to think about there is building a common control framework that works across multi-clouds. So taking something like the NIST cybersecurity framework, or in Singapore, the MAS TRM, and building a control framework around that the implementation details might be different across multiple clouds, but the control objectives and the spirit of the controls remain the same. I think that's key. Then the final thing, I think, is making sure that you have a really good understanding, to Ian's point, around the tools that you have. Do they all work across multiple clouds? And if not, what gaps do you have? Do you need a different platform or set of capabilities to work across a different cloud provider? So before you kind of bring on a second cloud provider, I would say it's important to have that level of visibility into your current tool set. Does it support all of the features across multiple clouds that you expect? And how do you map that back to your bank-wide or fintech-wide control framework? I think that's very important.
Thank you, Moss. That is very, very clear and sharp there. Sid, will you have anything else like to add on the multi-cloud before I go back to some couple of very good questions from our audience?
Yeah. I think great points by Ian and Miles both, and I tend to have take a broader view because I speak to customers of both flavors. There are some very large fintechs that are completely single cloud, and they don't have any plans to go to multi-cloud, right? And there are yet others who started off with a single cloud provider, and then they want to add another cloud provider for a regulatory reason. Sometimes it's because they want to build a new use case. So I've seen the entire spectrum, and I think it's about integrating with what the cloud providers offer, right? It's very important, whatever cloud security platform you choose, it's not at odds with what the cloud providers are offering. So you have to think about how you can leverage whatever the cloud providers are offering natively, enhance that, make it better, bring in security expertise to automate and bring in ability to protect from threats at scale, and work together with whatever the cloud providers are offering. And to that extent, at Palo Alto Networks, that's the strategy we take, right, with our cloud security platform, Prisma Cloud, is we are close partners with all the CSPs, and we spend a lot of time working on joint customers together, on helping customers solve their business challenges. So my point is, whether it's multi-cloud or it's a single cloud, your cloud security platform has to work well with the cloud provider's native capabilities for your strategy to be successful.
Thank you, Sid. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the discussion is moving very, very smoothly. I think we are getting a lot of insights there. So for our practitioners there, put your questions to Q&A so that we can take them out, we can call it out, and then we can have a very good candid discussion here. To the second question I see in Q&A, at what stage should my company switch to multi-cloud? I suppose we have answered that. If we have not addressed your question, please put it in again so that we can get the experts here to highlight that again. Now, there's this question that I thought was a very good one, and I want to call out to all my three speakers. Maybe I'll invite Miles to have a step at it first before I hand over to Ian and Sid. What are some cloud data security best practices, and how should startups prioritize these practices?
Okay, thanks, Ruben. I won't turn my camera back on. I hope my audio is still fine for you guys. Yeah, okay, great. I think from a data security standard, I think one of the things that differentiates cloud versus on-premise is how easy encryption is to do everywhere. So most of the major public cloud providers make it extremely easy for fintechs and financial institutions to perform encryption at scale across all of their data, whether it's running in databases, object storage, or on the compute instances. So I think there's really no excuse not to have encrypted data running in the cloud. The second thing that I think is a big area that teams should focus on is how do they inventory and classify that data to determine where they have sensitive data and making sure that they have the right protections. So I know, various cloud providers' native built-in services and also platforms like Palo Alto have the ability to, look inside object storage and classify data to determine the risk of the access control and the configuration settings. So I think once you're in a good story with your encryption settings, then looking at the various controls that you have around access to that data, making sure that you're classifying it appropriately, whether it's confidential or internal only or public. And then based on that, making sure that you have the right controls from your control framework enabled by default for that given data set.
And let me bring it over to Ian, and then after to Sid as well to take a step at this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of data security best practice, for cloud, I would say you start with a comprehensive strategy. What I highly recommend, and I know a lot of banking regulators are recommending, is a zero trust mindset or paradigm, right? And so in terms of the best practice behind that, you approach your architecture with a compromised mindset, as in you plan and you segment or micro segment your environment in a way that you're able to deal with security events as they come up. So it's not just a strategy about, hey, we draw a parameter that is trusted and untrusted, and as long as we validate you once, you can come into our trusted environment and do whatever you want, right? So a zero trust mindset is the opposite of that. It is continuously validating all digital interactions, be it an API interactions, be it a user ID logon, be it a domain admin, doing work, be it a developer, and in different environments. So I think that adopting a zero trust mindset is key. Now, coupled with the zero trust mindset, because zero trust is really a strategy and an ideal, right, that you want, you've got to build capabilities that conforms to that strategy. And the capabilities I'm talking about here is really around 4 areas. You want to have visibility. And so, when you're looking at a cloud, you know where the north-south traffic is going. You know how east-west traffic is going. You need to know what, inter-container traffic is doing, right? So you need to gain visibility in your environment so that you can make trust decisions about those interactions. Visibility alone is not enough. You need context. So you need capabilities and platforms that tells you what they what that traffic is, right? And maybe knit different components, security events from different devices and correlate it so that if an endpoint's doing something that's beaconing out and you see it on an egress point of your cloud, that you've got high efficacy. This is something bad that's going on. So not only visibility, but really drawing on machine learning and AI and threat intelligence sources to detect threats within your environment. Then you need the zero trust capabilities of control. And we've talked about this, in terms of a multi-cloud environment where you want to have the ability to implement consistent policies, granular policies across different environments. And so that creates consistency, that helps with your regulatory compliance, and you want to be able to do it as well, through the whole life cycle of your development. And then lastly, the zero trust capability of respond, because we are dealing in a very, very fast-paced environment, and we're not the only ones innovating. The attackers have been innovating as well, and when they come into our environment, they are also going to move fast. So I think investing in capabilities that give you the ability to automate and orchestrate a lot of the mundane activities so that you can focus your threat analysts on looking at high value threat hunting activities is fundamental to your success. So those are just having a zero trust mindset and then building those zero trust capabilities to support that strategy would be what I say.
Thank you, Yen. And even though you have mentioned that zero trust is the ideal, it's a utopia, but it shouldn't stop us from working towards it, because it does set the premise of approach when it comes to setting up that strategy on cybersecurity, and also that working with DevOps to make sure that these things are in place. To Sid, I would like to understand things, I'd like to add on to this, because I thought this is about best practices, and I'm sure in your experience there are a lot of things you can share with us.
I think the question was about data security, right? So I think Miles actually said it perfectly. I can't think of anything to say to top what he said about security in the cloud, right? And that's a great example actually of how your cloud environment can actually give you much greater visibility and the ability to encrypt data and be actually more secure than probably if you had a more traditional on-premises environment. So I think Miles spoke about data in the cloud, but I also want to touch on an additional element, which is data in motion, which is as data is going to the cloud. So, when you start thinking about shadow IT and you start thinking about people using cloud applications, not necessarily infrastructure as a service always, it could be software as a service or collaboration apps. They might be sharing source code or some other form of intellectual property through a collaboration application with each other, not maliciously, but they might be doing it for a business reason that might not be sanctioned. You need the ability to look at that traffic as well and figure out while the data is on the way to the cloud, is there anything that is moving from the user's device to the cloud that shouldn't be, right? So I think it's about a complete data security approach in addition to the stuff that Miles spoke about and Ian spoke about. I'd also call out the data in motion and DLP in line with the traffic is also super important.
Thank you, Sid. So I guess if I would hear correctly, there's a lot of relevance to what Ian shared about visibility as well, because then you really want to track and see where are all these movements. So we do have a question from the audience as well. So I guess, okay, the question is rather generic, but I'll just invite everyone to attempt and also maybe to add on more insights to that. Do cloud providers, does it mean that cloud providers don't necessarily mean they provide cloud security?
Can I take that?
Sure, please.
This is one of my favorite questions. So actually, in the cloud, right, it's about the shared responsibility, right? It's you don't, just because you're in the cloud, you don't by default become secure. Yes, the cloud provider is responsible for up to a certain part of the stack, like the physical security of the data center, the security of the underlying servers. But the moment you start talking about the applications that are being run by the organization, the responsibility of securing the applications rests with the customer. Now, to secure those applications, you might use some tools from the cloud service provider. They do offer security features that you can pay for and deploy, but configuring those security features and the responsibility of how you use that is with the customer. Now, when you start thinking about doing that at scale, when you have very few security people, and when you have multiple cloud providers and you have multiple applications running, that's where it becomes harder to manage for a lean security team. And that's where the idea of having a cloud security platform that can help you stitch your security and risk management picture together, that's where it becomes more relevant. So the short answer is cloud providers do offer security capabilities that fulfill their part of the shared responsibility model, but the customer has to think about scalable ways to implement their part of the shared responsibility model. So the answer is that it depends.
Right. And having said it depends, it also shows that you have been there, because otherwise it's very easy to give a binary one. But to Miles at GSS, how do you balance that between what's being provided and what else more do you do?
Yeah, I agree there. Sid hit the nail right on the money there with that one. It is exactly a shared responsibility model. And I think the first thing to understand is, as Sid pointed out, exactly what is the service provider doing for you. So, as a regulated entity, you really do need to understand your whole control environment. You can't just say that, you thought the cloud provider was encrypting your data, therefore you didn't do it. It's still your responsibility to make sure that you have good controls there. That said, cloud providers do provide a lot of built-in native capabilities for various functionalities. Amazon's got things like Guard Duty and Security Hub, and Microsoft Azure has similar products. So I think looking at what comes natively and built into the cloud provider, and how can you use that? If you do have plans to be multi-cloud, how does the native product from the cloud provider play nicely with multiple clouds? And that's sometimes when you need to go to a more commercial multi-cloud platform like Prisma, for example. And yeah, just getting a good understanding of what's there. Sometimes the cloud provider's capabilities are very easy to consume. It can be one button, turn it on, and you immediately start getting value from that security capability. So I think a combination of both, understanding what the cloud provider does for you, then understanding what the cloud provider or you can get natively within the platform itself, and then complementing that with the right tool and platform to allow you to have a really comprehensive picture of your security posture across multiple clouds or multiple platforms.
Thank you, Miles. And Ian, would like to chip in as well?
I don't have anything to add. They both covered the topic beautifully.
Thank you. But Ian, I do have a question before I go to the third question on the Q&A. Ian, I do have a question for you then. We talk a lot. I heard some words like agility. I heard things like speed. And also we talk about risk. So in this case, do you see security getting sidelined in the favor of agility and speed, exposing a cloud native fintech to growing cyber risk? And how do you suggest they build a balance between these two?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And I mean, not all fintechs are created equal, right? I think that's the fundamental thing. And I go back to what we said earlier, around culture, around, security ownership. I think that if you don't have any focus on cybersecurity in your fintech, you're going to get sidelined. Cybersecurity is going to be an afterthought. And when you're growing your fintech from a startup to a scale up, now you've got Series B funding, now you've got all the attention coming at you. Now you're scrambling because all you've ever done was use freeware tools and use whatever free tools that you can get your hands on, open source, what have you, and you don't actually have a comprehensive and a cohesive set of capabilities that is demonstrable to regulators, to business partners, to other FSIs that you're going to integrate your APIs with. You've got to grow up and be a real FSI organization, because that is the space that you play in. So if I had to say anything, yes, it is a risk for many companies that don't have a security focus from the get-go, to fall into that trap, and now they're reverse engineering security back into their environment, and that is always a bad idea, always costly. And I would say even this, right, because we've got examples of this in the US, that sometimes a security breach is an existential issue for your startup, right? You don't get many chances when everybody's clawing to be the next big fintech, and a betrayal of trust of your consumers is not a good place to start. So going back to it, right? Yes, there's a fine balance between the two, and that's why the executive leadership have to know and have to be cognizant about the importance of cybersecurity from the get-go, and they need to bring in a leader as early as they possibly can afford, right? Once they have a minimum viable product, or maybe the CTO's got to have a security focus of some sort, to start building that culture early, in that process, in that growth cycle. And then once you have a leader, then the rest of it, the leader, is responsible to take care of. Is that someone's, seasoned like Miles, right? He would know that, okay, I need to build cybersecurity into the entire life cycle, right? I'm not just going to do, a scan at the last minute and stop a project from going live and affecting speed, affecting agility. I need to be there from day one. When they're starting to develop, I need to embed tools that developers can use so that they don't have to go back and forth and second guess themselves. I need to, again, build that collaborative culture. So, that leadership will provide that. And the last bit I would say is that you also need to have a very outward facing component to your security. You need to be able to present the value of security to your executive committees, to the investors, to your customers, to regulators especially, right? So you've got to have that external facing component. So all in all, to summarize, culture is key, and building security into the entire life cycle is key, and over-communicating, as Miles said earlier, is key.
Very good points here. And Miles, this is coming to you then. How do you then bring it back on a practical note? How do you bring it back to GXS between agility and risk?
Yeah, I think what Ian mentioned there around making sure that you bake security into the entire life cycle is key. I think typically what you'll see is that within a fintech at least, the number of engineers and product developers that you have will outstrip the security team by at least 10 or 20 to 1. And that's probably ambitious numbers for the security team. So you might end up in a situation where you've got one security engineer to every 20, 30, 40 engineers, right? So you need to have a framework and a CI/CD life cycle that allows the developers to self-service as much of this as possible. So rather than put in kind of hard gates in and come in right at the end and say no, how can you build these guardrails into the entire development life cycle that allow the developers themselves to constantly look at their application code, their dependencies, their infrastructure as code for cloud resources, and how do you get them to have immediate feedback of any vulnerabilities that they're introducing into the build? Yes, you can put hard gates in there to stop them deploying to production, but the sooner that they get that visibility into what issues they're introducing from a merge request into the product, the sooner that they can fix it and as everybody knows, the sooner you can fix it, the cheaper it is to fix. So, that's appreciated by everyone. But I think, yeah, a lot of organizations, a lot of vendors use the term shift left, and it's been around for a long time now. But it is super, super important to really try to make that come true within your organization and really give the developers and the engineers the tools to self-service, have immediate feedback, and keep that vulnerability loop as short as possible so they can action on it and mitigate these threats and vulnerabilities before they have time to manifest in an actual production environment.
Thank you, Miles. Look, guys, we have very good questions coming from the audience. So I would like us to take those questions from the audience if you guys would allow me to. To Sid, I had this question that come out and I thought was quite a very interesting one, and therefore I want to leave that for you. What are some of the important questions that we should take back to our cloud service or cloud security providers? What should we be asking you? What should we be asking our cloud service providers?
Look, I think I'll break that up into two parts, right? One is the standard stuff, which is what kind of security assessments do they have? Are they ISO certified? And of course, a lot of the major, the big three CSPs, as it were, they all have pretty similar certifications and assessments, which kind of certify their data centers, certify their processes, and all of that stuff. I think that's important, right? If you're engaging a cloud provider that's non-tier one, then you might need to investigate what kind of assessment and certifications, third-party assessments they have. The second part of it is we need to ask the cloud providers what are the tools that are available to customers to help them execute their part of the shared responsibility model. Gartner has been saying for the last many years that 99% of security incidents in the cloud are the customer's fault. And this is not to criticize or critique customers, but just to say that the cloud providers have got pretty decent foundational security, but it's the customer's instances that are running which are usually misconfigured or stuff is left unencrypted. So you should ask the cloud provider, what tools are you offering me to enable me to embed security from code to cloud? So from the time that the application is being built, all the way to the time the application is in production, at all the different stages, what tools are available natively, right? Then you need to think about whether those tools suffice for your organization or not. As your organization scales, you probably will find that you will use some native cloud security capabilities, but you'll need to find a way to scale that and stitch it all together, which is when you should ask the cloud provider which security platforms or security vendors do you partner with, or which are the ones that you recommend, or which are the ones that you have seen other customers use to stitch their whole security picture together, right? And in a lot of cases, you will find that your cloud service provider, whoever your relationship manager is or your pre-sales engineer, they'll have an answer for you, right? If you're talking about things like container security, Kubernetes security, I'm not gonna say Palo Alto Networks, obviously, but that's the question you should be asking, and they probably will have an answer for you to say that, look, we think that for your environment, if you're going multi-cloud, this particular platform might supplement what we have. So we could go on and on, but these are the top 2 or 3 questions that I think people should ask and then dig deeper from there.
Miles, what will you have asked them?
Yeah, I think to just supplement that, in addition to the cloud native tools that they have, most cloud providers have frameworks like the well-architected framework from AWS, which doesn't focus so much on the technical control, but more on the design of the workload itself. So I would ask your cloud providers what frameworks or quick starts or infrastructure as code templates even do you have available for my workload that I can deploy that comes with inbuilt security, all of the best practices that they prescribe, making sure that you're starting off on a really good footnote and you're not left to yourself to build your initial technology stack on the cloud.
Right, thanks, Miles. I do have one question for Yin. And I thought this is actually very aligned to what Sid has mentioned earlier, because Sid actually talked about at what point of time do you have to then move away from just using those already available solutions to something more sophisticated, and that's exactly to this question. At what stage of my growth should I move away from relying on just cloud native security to augment it with a sophisticated security platform? So Yin, please have a step at that.
Sure. Well, again, it's so different, right, from case to case. I would work backwards, right? I would say, what are your use cases, from a CISO perspective, right? What are the drivers that you're trying, that create scenarios that you're trying to prevent? And then, so for example, if you are a fintech organization, you've got advanced attacks, right? Then you figure out, okay, look, if I need to prevent these types of advanced attacks, for example, someone infiltrating behind, into my cloud environment and beaconing out, then do I have the capabilities to detect a beacon? So I ask myself, do I have the capabilities? Then, then I would go to my cloud engineers, I would go to cloud service provider, I would go to cloud vendors and say, look, in order to detect a beacon, what capabilities do I need? And so you sort of, I usually work backwards from the things that I'm trying to prevent within my organization and finding out whether I actually have the visibility, I have the controls, I have the threat correlation to do that. So that's how I would do it. So wherever you are in your growth cycle, you should really be very cognizant of the things within your environment that is consequential to you, and build up the tools, whether it be from the CSP, whether it's augmented, with a platform player that's multi-cloud capable, whether you have the right tool sets. So it really depends. It really depends on what's consequential to you and whether or not you have the tools to to defend yourself accordingly. So yeah, that would be my answer. I know it's not a oh yeah, when you get your Series B funding, go find a mature vendor.
No. Yeah, I think you raised a very good point, because ultimately it all boils back to the founders and the owners knowing their business, and at the end, what is it that really matters? What is it that's really truly worth protecting? And you should have that from day one, so that you can then align those things accordingly. Now, I want to let Sid take a step at that question, because I'm very sure he has some good answers to that.
Okay, the same question. Okay. Well, I think the moment you start realizing that your pace of innovation, or the rate of release of products is accelerating, or the moment you start moving closer to bringing your products actually out to market, and the amount of development you're doing starts shooting up, I think that could be a good kind of measure to start thinking about it, because you need to start thinking about protecting automation with automation. So if your DevOps teams are using a lot of automated constructs like infrastructure as code templates to provision infrastructure quickly, scale up your workloads, they're starting to use those kind of tools, then you probably need to start thinking about how your security strategy is going to scale. And you probably need a specialized cloud security platform that Gartner is calling CNAPP at that point. So that could be one indicator. I would like to think that security should be a focus right from the beginning, right? So you should always keep your eyes open for complexity that's creeping into your security program, and it's becoming harder to manage. Then you should start looking at a specialized cloud security tool to augment what's being offered by the cloud providers, not necessarily to replace it in all situations.
Thank you, Sid. Now, I'm mindful of time, so I'll just have one last question, and I would like to let Miles take that. It's a very interesting question on STEM. I know Miles would have already addressed a lot of quite the different pieces of it during the whole conversation. But as STEM put it across, could you have the cake and eat it? How could you have top effective cyber security and yet retain good agility? How is that even possible? I know you have mentioned that many times, Miles, but look, let's end off with this question.
Yeah, okay, that is a good one. I think you've just got to be careful with over-indexing on cybersecurity controls that really remove agility. So how do you kind of avoid that? As we've mentioned multiple times, is put in as much control baked into the development lifecycle and CI/CD processes as possible. So by the time that something comes through the release pipeline and is ready to go to production, it's already cleared all the checks and balances and security checklists and controls that have been defined by the teams. I think that's one of the first things. The second thing, and this goes back to my point around having a small team compared to a big engineering team, is you absolutely have to automate, automate, automate. Everything that your security team is doing, if it's an offline spreadsheet or a checklist or some sort of manual sign-off, you aren't going to be able to be very agile, and you are going to slow the engineering teams down. So I would say, as a cybersecurity team aiming for, world-class controls, is what parts of those controls are manual and time-consuming, and how can you automate and bake those into the everyday needs of the developer? And typically that is from, platform tools that allow you to have visibility across the source code, the build lifecycle, the deploy and runtime, and then making sure that all the users that need to have access to those tools, and they can see what their issues are in very short amounts of time.
Thank you, Miles. It's great to hear that from you, because you have really put it very well in perspective for our audience. Now, I'm mindful of time, and now right now I just want to invite all my speakers here, starting from Sid to Yen and then end up with Miles. What is that one advice you have, bearing in mind that our audience can range from startups, pre-seed, all the way to potentially Series D and unicorn even. So if you have just one advice for them, Sid, Yen, and Miles, what will you share with them? Sid, please.
Well, I would just say that the security team needs force multipliers in terms of technology to help them keep pace with the business. You're never going to have an equal number of security engineers as you do developers. It's just never going to happen. So that force multiplier, it's not designed for that, right? And all of these fintechs they're not in the business of security. Companies like us are in the business of security, and we know how much effort it takes to build that expertise. So you need force multipliers. Look at platforms or look at technology capabilities that can help be those force multipliers for your security team to allow your business to grow faster while managing risk effectively. So look for the force multiplier effect.
Thanks. And Yen?
Sure. I'll leave you with, zero trust plus platform equals future proof. Right, have a zero trust strategy so that it's comprehensive. Have a platform approach so that it's cohesive. Right, you need to build those capabilities that can help you implement zero trust, and that will really set you up, right, for all the evolutions that's coming at you with innovations in the cloud, with the borderless workforce, with evolving technology like the metaverse and 5G and what have you. At the moment, as far as we can see, those are very viable models that you should adopt.
And last but not least, Miles, please.
Yeah, I think I'll take this one back to culture. I think the first thing is, do you have someone in your organization that it's their focus? It might not be their full-time job, but at least a percentage of their time, particularly if you're a small fintech, 5 to 10 people total, then at least having one person focusing on security is a good place to start. And the second piece of culture I would say is, how frequently is that person talking with your founder or your CEO and your leadership team, and communicating those issues and roadmap and target operating model to the founder. And if the answer is never, then you probably need to remediate that cultural problem. And a good rhythm might be once a week or every other week, or at least once a month, where the security champion is getting together with the investment team and the founder to just talk about security and what challenges that are ahead, and just to give them an idea of what they're doing right, what they're not doing very well, and what funding they might need to build a proper capability. So I would go with that.
Thank you so much to all my speakers. Look, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, from all my audience, if you guys feel that you should have cleared all this earlier, and it's not too late. It is not too late. So I really hope that you guys leave this session today with certain nuggets of ideas and how you can further improve the cybersecurity strategy that you have. And I usually like to leave a session with a quote, and I think one quote that Miles said it, and I would love to repeat that: the sooner you fix it, the cheaper you fix. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much once again. If everyone's physical, I'd like to give applause to all my esteemed speakers here. Before we end up, just to take note that we will be sharing with all of you a survey as well, so that we will let us know your feedback, and so that we can improve our future sessions. Now, once again, thank you to all my speakers, and I would like to end this session right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, folks.
Thanks, everyone.